Well, good morning, one and all. Good morning to the assembled masses here in the sanctuary, and of course to the thousands of you that are out on Facebook and on Zoom. We're so glad you're here. Yes, today's topic is oneness, and the oneness that we all experience when we're tied into the all, the divine. Oneness is our I don't want to say goal, but it's really. It's what we're striving for. And on that note, I want to tell you a story. This is a true story. Yes, better? Oh, there you go. Wow. I'll start all over again. Good morning. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah. Picture yourselves in New York City, in Times Square. Now imagine you're walking down the sidewalk in Times Square and you see up ahead of you one of those kiosks, and it's a guy selling hot dogs and brats and things like that. And you happen to notice in the line is a man and a woman, husband and wife probably. And you see that the vendor is a Hindu, maybe a Sikh. He's got the wrap on his head, and he's got emblems around his little a cart that indicate that he's a spiritualist in that belief. And you see the husband and the wife looking at each other, and the husband leans down to the wife and says, "Watch this. I'm going to show him something. Watch this." And they walk up to the vendor and they ask the vendor, or the vendor asks them what he wants. And the man looks at the vendor and steeples his hands like this and says, "I want one with everything." And the vendor looks at him and very dutifully picks up the bun and puts the brat in there, and the sauerkraut and the chili and the onion, the whole thing. And very carefully hands it back to him and says, "That will be $5.50. And the man pulls out a $20 bill and hands him the 20. And the vendor puts it back in his cart. And then he closes the drawer of the cash register and leans over to the next person and says, "Next." And the man in the line looks at him and says, "I want my change." And the vendor looks at him and steeples his hands and looks into his eyes and says, "Change comes from within." So change does come from within. And that's going to be what we're talking about this morning. Another story I want to tell you, which is also a true story, is last week I was here and we were talking about the subject of learning about yourself and about St. Paul's writings when it comes to being godly and being a follower of our way shower, Jesus. And I was reading this book, the book of John, where not the book of John, the book of Ephesians. And Ephesians is a book where St. Paul was writing a letter to Ephesus, to the church in Ephesus. And I was looking at a particular verse, and all of a sudden it dawned on me that what I was reading was really Paul's opinion of how the universe works and how this whole system of spirituality works. That may not be your opinion, that may not be your philosophy, but it hit me that was kind of what I was reading. This is Paul talking about his concept of what's happening in the universe. And I wanted to share this with Karen. Karen is my wife, and I sat down at the kitchen table and I said, I have this opinion, this thing that I want to share with you and kind of bounce it off you. Now, most of you have never met Karen. You probably will. She's an LUT candidate at Golden Valley, the church in Golden Valley, and she's going to be available for doing talks and doing classes. Well, she's also from New Jersey, and she has that brash East Coast, no nonsense, throw it in your face kind of a thing, and she grew up with that. Her family life wasn't particularly touchy-feely, new thought. And she has this tendency to take things and put her twist on it and then throw it back in my face. I'm sure we're recording this. I'm sure I'm going to hear about this when I get home. I'm doing this lovingly, Karen. I'm doing this lovingly. So, yeah, she does that, and I'm not at the point yet where I can look beyond that, where I can see beyond that. It still gets me. And I talk all the time about John Gray, the guy who wrote the book Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. Now that work, keep in mind, that work really, its seminal ideas began in the 60s and the 70s. And back then it was man and woman. Men do this and women do that. And men think, and I think in my evolution, I think really it's a concept of now masculine energy and feminine energy. We all have each. And in certain areas, yours may be more preponderant than others. I have a real feminine energy a need to be heard when I'm sharing an idea. I mean, everybody does. I'm not saying anything that's not any news bulletin to any of you. But the thing that I'm learning in relationships is it doesn't matter what it is somebody says. It doesn't matter what the point is. It doesn't matter what the opinion is. None of that matters. What matters is being heard. Sitting down and having somebody look at you in your eyes and really listen and say, wow, that is a fantastic concept. Where did that come from? Where did that originate? Tell me about how that formulated and from your history, how does that percolate to the surface? Rather than what happened last week, which was her saying, well, that's no different than Jesus. It was just Jesus' opinion. In other words, she kind of took what I said, wrapped it up, and just kind of tossed it right back in my face. And what I wasn't smart enough at the moment, I was kind of going, but what I really wanted to say was, well, no, that's not exactly right, because Jesus is written about as being the Son of God. Some people believe Jesus was God, is God, and He taught us the way the way that we can live. St. Peter was telling us about what Jesus said. So that's kind of the difference. And I wanted to share this idea with her, and that's what I got. I got this these are my words, I got this lecture back from her about a better way to think of it, or a more inclusive way to think of it. And I felt shut down. And I listened to her and I kind of nodded my head, and then I got up and I left the table. And of course, she perceived accurately, and she stopped me and she said, what's wrong? You're mad about something. What's going on? So that opened up this whole conversation about how I wasn't feeling listened to, and she wasn't working to see the truth about what's beyond the opinion, my front. And we got into a knockdown, drag out. Well, it really wasn't a knockdown, drag out. Let's just say it got heated, as they often do. It's kind of fun. And as a matter of fact, at the end of the day, we, as we almost always do, get back together and smile and laugh about, what happened and how silly our reactions were. But that's not before, of course, I slam the door and walk out of the apartment. And boy, I'll tell you, when I'm in my car driving to work and I rehash that conversation with Karen, oh my God, I slay her. She's just on the floor begging for mercy. And oh, Lou, you're right, of course. How could I be so silly? That's in my fantasy. So, my interpretation of what happened that morning was a demonstration of my smallness, my inability to see beyond what was happening and to see beyond her response to me. And I do that so often. I'm getting better now, as I said, are coming together at the end of the day and sort of analyzing what happened, or maybe the next day. But what I find so fascinating is I talk about this all the time. And yet still to this day, if something happens to me, if there's an interaction that I have with another human being, right at that instant I just lose it and my ego goes boom and explodes, and it's my ego reaction and it's my humanness that gets in my way. That's not fostering oneness. That's not fostering oneness. Well, my submission to you listening and watching is that it isn't about we, It's about me. It's about me and where I am in my evolution as a spiritual entity. And it's about you and where you are. When that moment arises, when you're in your kitchen with your significant other, or when you're at your workplace with your workmate, and something happens in that instant, that's the moment where you have the opportunity to see beyond and not get caught up in the dust bowl that's there being thrown up in the moment. And I believe when we can get to that point where we can see beyond and be willing to be in the moment and see the God as those, I'm sure most of you in here understand the word namaste means the God in me recognizes and acknowledges the God in you. Wouldn't it be nice if we can do that the instant that something comes up? Even the instant we see someone's face, just see the God emanating from that human being. I'm a long way from that. I still let things fester, and I still get into, verbal jiu-jitsu matches with Karen and storm out of the door, and then of course shred her to pieces when I'm in my car, winning every argument I ever have with her in the car when she's not there. And by the way, whenever you're driving down the road and you see somebody in the car and all you see is this, they're going like this. That's what's happening, is they're having that conversation with somebody that's back home. And they're shredding them. Oh, they're winning every argument doing it that way. So I know for me, it's really a process of understanding my divinity. And that's I don't want to say that's a hurdle, but that's huge, is understanding who I am as a God being. And then being willing to take a breath, to meditate on the subject, to allow that baloney of my human shell that's just this ego piece of armor to fall away, and to see the other human being as a divine entity. Then there's a oneness. There's a oneness that builds between me and that other person. There's a oneness that I can feel with the universe. There's a oneness that I can see and I can feel with the divine nature. And I believe that that's where the concept begins. That's where the feeling and the energy of oneness begins. It's with me individually and with you individually. The change has to come from within. As the man at the hot dog stand said, change must come from within. Namaste. And I mean namaste.